I would just like spend my summer vacations trying to like send out like poems and short stories and whatever and try to get published.
Oh my goodness. Do you have any of those poems left over?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do actually. They're terrible.
Hey, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
In this episode, you'll get to know best-selling author Dorie Clark, and you'll discover the fascinating story of how she went from receiving a master's in theology from Harvard by the age of 20 to becoming one of the world's leading authorities in strategic thinking. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is My Success Project. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. I am Dave Crenshaw, and this is a show where I'm teaching my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, but you get to come along for the ride. I'm a best-selling author, I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. But I started this podcast as a project to really help my kids. I'm a father of 3, I care about my kids, and I want them to grow up being successful, but I also want to expose them to a lot of different ways that they might achieve that success, and people that have achieved balanced success. So not just in one aspect of their life, like financially or their career, but lots of areas. And my goal with this was to create something that wouldn't just help them, but would help you. Or if you have friends or family, that you can share this with them and you can discuss with them and look at ways that you can make it a part of your life. And in fact, at the end of every episode, I create a list of actions that you can take. So you'll hear Dorie's story and the things that she's done to be successful, and then I'll break it down into bite-sized pieces so you and the people that you're listening with can say, let's do one thing about this. Some of my guests, they're highly successful. Perhaps you've heard about them in the news or on social media. My guest today is certainly one of those because she's a best-selling author, Wall Street Journal bestseller, and she has one of the most fascinating stories of success, one of the most unusual paths to success that you'll ever hear. But she practices everything that she preaches. She's become a good friend of mine. When my family went to New York, she invited me to go to a Broadway show with her, and she's just done lots of little friendly, nice things to build a connection through the years, and she's become someone that I consider a very dear friend. We first met through her courses in LinkedIn Learning. My guest today is Dorie Clark. She's a world-renowned speaker, consultant, and the best-selling author, as I mentioned, of the book The Long Game, as well as Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out. I met her as an instructor of LinkedIn Learning. She's consistently one of the top course instructors that are there. She's been named to the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50 and was recognized as the #1 communication coach in the world by Marshall Goldsmith leading Global Coaches Awards. She's a regular contributor to Fast Company and Harvard Business Review and runs the show Host Better on Newsweek. In short, Dorie has been taking the world by storm since the young age of 14, and you're going to hear the entire story right now. Dorie, how you doing?
Hey Dave, I'm so glad to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm so excited because as I'm looking at this video right now, I can tell you're in your new location. You've been living in New York for such a long time, and now you're in beautiful, sunny Miami. And when I thought about starting the show, on the premise of gathering stories of successful people that I know and sharing those stories with my kids and with my followers, you were right at the top of the list. I thought I have to have you on because you have led such an interesting life. You've done so many different things. And sometimes I think when someone has that many different experiences, it doesn't quite work out right because there's too much going on. And yet you have accomplished so many things that I just had to have you share your story with us. So I'm so grateful that you took the time to do this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
We're going to share your whole arc. And I like to start with this question because it sets things up for the future. When you were young, what did you want to become? What did you think your career was going to be? And I'm talking not when you were like 6 or 7. I'm talking about, in your early teens, what did you think was going to be your career path?
Well, guessing for a long time that I would be a lawyer because,
Mm,
I feel like most people and frankly most parents, I'm sure this is not you, Dave, but most parents are extremely uncreative about the career options that they kind of present to
mm.
their kids. And so it's like, okay, if you're reasonably verbal, they'll be like, you should be a lawyer. And I mean, you get doctor pushed on you as well, but then if you're a little too resistant to the whole frog dissection thing, then they're like, fine, a lawyer.
Sure.
And I was interested in the concept. I mean, I think that it was not that I loved the law so much, but I wanted, I was into school. I was a good student. I wanted to like do things right. I wanted to, frankly, go for the thing that was like societally high status. So I was like, yes, I'll go to law school. That's what I'll do. And so that was in my head probably
Okay.
from maybe 8 to 12 or something like that. I started to get my own views when I was a little older.
Yeah, so right there, let's pause on that because not many 8-year-olds say, I want to be a lawyer. And yet, what I've looked at your story, the first time I read your bio, I'm like, I'm looking at a Doogie Howser right here. It seemed like you were so advanced, so far ahead of the curve. Talk to me a little bit about what academics were like, because you were ahead of when most people go to college and such, right?
Yeah, I mean, I went to college when I was 14,
Okay.
and people sometimes are like, "Oh my God, that's so early! I can't believe it." The truth is, as long as you're reasonably intelligent and as long as you're reasonably mature, this is a thing that plenty of people could do. I just think we have kind of the wrong expectations.
Mm,
I grew up as an only child, and all the people in my life were older. And I mean much older. So
okay.
I'm sure there's downsides to those things, but there's also upsides. And the upside is you just become a pretty mature person. And if your social context is adults, you are going to kind of think that way and get into that mode. So it's not that I was so special or so smart going off to school or whatever. I think that it was just really a different social context.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that you're being humble, which I appreciate about you, but it was exceptional. I would think that because you're making those decisions so early, you maybe had pressure to choose a career path too early, or maybe that wasn't there. Did your parents just say, "Hey, you can do whatever you want. You're capable of doing whatever you want," or were they sort of trying to push you a certain direction during that time?
I don't really remember my parents exerting any sort of pressure or even really suggestions about careers. I was the one that was interested in it. I mean, by the time I got to
Okay.
college, for sure, my mom had opinions, and she still wanted me to be a lawyer. She's like, "Why can't you wanted to be a lawyer? What happened to that?" And she thought that would have been a better move. But no, as a little kid, I was just interested in that stuff. I was in this very small town, and it really felt like nothing was happening. And I think that is in fact because nothing was happening. And the only way you'd sort of see things was like on TV, and of course we didn't have cable. There was no internet. And you'd read books and stuff, but it just seemed like stuff was happening everywhere else, not where I was.
Okay. Was that motivational for you?
Yeah, I wanted to get out. I wanted to get going living
Okay.
my life. So for me, the world of work was very interesting and appealing. I had a very non-sophisticated understanding of it. But as a kid growing up in the 80s, I mean, I was like, I'd watch LA Law and I'm like, oh, wow, that's so sophisticated. Or like the Michael J. Fox movie, The Secret of My Success. And he's like this intern in New York. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Oh
that's
yeah.
incredible. So I wanted to be out there and doing things.
Well, and I guess not as a lawyer, obviously, but I would say that you've achieved a lot of that. You do live a very sophisticated life, and you have accomplished very sophisticated things. So I guess good things came from you watching television in the 80s a little bit. Um,
That's right. That's the moral of the story,
yeah,
everyone. So watch
watch TV,
reruns.
kids. That'll help you out. What was your first degree in?
I got an undergraduate degree in philosophy.
Okay.
I was really into the liberal arts. I loved reading and learning and thinking about big ideas because it really does help you think critically. Learning about the history of ideas and how people have conceptualized the world, I think is really powerful. But I want to just take a minute, Dave. I'm really curious about you. Like, what was your arc? I mean, I know from my book, For the Long Game, you were talking about how it was really important to you as a value, even early on, that you wanted to have a job where you weren't like working yourself to death because you wanted to spend a lot of time with your family. But how did you
Yeah.
first decide that entrepreneurship was the ticket? Like, was it very clear from the beginning that that was going to be the case for you, or did you kind of stumble into that?
It was an interesting thing is that it was driven by fear. And I had a conversation with a friend of ours, Kwame Christian, who's also a LinkedIn learning instructor, and he overcame his fear of negotiation to become a negotiator. For me, I grew up around failed entrepreneurs. I called them entrepreneur serial killers. And they would start businesses and they would fail. And so I kind of had this morbid fascination with, why is this happening? Can't we stop this? And that eventually led me to entrepreneurship. I mean, originally I thought I was going to be Steven Spielberg. I wanted to be a movie director. And I love that you said philosophy, by the way. In fact, I have a book right up here on my shelf that's just sort of like a summary of philosophical ideas. And whenever I feel like I'm getting stuck in my thinking, I just pull that out. Because even if you don't agree with a certain philosophy, the act of assessing whether or not you agree with it is powerful. I think it stirs ideas. I'm assuming you can relate to that
Yeah,
feeling.
that's very cool, Dave. I love that.
Okay, so you studied philosophy. I'm also fascinated with your next degree, right? So what did you choose to study next? You graduate in philosophy. You're like, I haven't had enough school. I need some more of it.
Well, it was that, but it was also I was 18 when I graduated from college, and the idea of like getting a full-time job and sort of entering into my career when I was 18, just it felt a little weird. Like I didn't really think of myself as super young, but going into a workplace, everybody really did feel significantly older than me. And
Well,
so
and can I pause on that for a second? I think that really, really makes sense in terms of your academics because you were ahead. So it wasn't like you were eager to jump in and start making money quickly. You just got a really, really deep education early, and you just wanted to expand that education. That's how I'm perceiving this.
yeah, I mean, I felt like I had time. I ended up going to Harvard Divinity School and getting a master's of theological studies. So I spent 2 years studying lots of different aspects of religion, although the broad category that I specialized in was known as Christianity and culture.
So I think when most people hear Harvard Divinity School, they're thinking, here is someone who wants to become clergy. Was that even in your mindset when you chose to study that?
I thought about it for like a hot minute, not because I really had such a deep seated passion to be a clergy member per se, but I didn't always have this language. But I've always been an advocate of social proof and ways to sort of marshal as much credibility in one's endeavors as possible. And so at the
Mm.
time, I was really thinking that a potentially viable career choice for me would be professional advocacy work and like nonprofit advocacy. And, I was doing a lot of volunteering, I was doing a lot of campus activism and stuff like that. And so I thought, gosh, there's really like a lot of moral authority that comes with being a member of the clergy. And so, maybe this would be a useful thing to do, not to literally serve as a minister, but to sort of have that credential of knowledge and learning and erudition. So I was like, okay, I'll just get the MTS and be fine with that.
So how has that degree in theology, that master's in theology, how has that influenced your work today?
What I've come to realize, it's not so much literally what I studied in divinity school, but I do see a through line in terms of the reason I went to divinity school and broadly speaking, why I was studying at a high level, what I was studying. And that is, I was interested in religion then and now because it is, for many people, and historically throughout time, it has been the way that people made sense of their lives. The way that people found meaning in their life was through a religious narrative, or that was their understanding of the world and how they fit into it. And I have always been interested in those kind of existential questions. And I actually think that in many ways, the work that I do today is not dissimilar in the sense that in a modern, largely secular society, work serves a similar purpose today in terms of how people find meaning and make meaning in their lives.
So would you consider yourself not religious, but aware and respectful of it? Or is there a religious aspect to the way that you approach life?
I am not really personally religious, but I find it super, super interesting. And I always love learning about religions and learning about religious traditions and, exploring things and taking tours and, visiting temples and visiting mosques and, all the things. I think it's a really fantastic way to understand different people and just understand the world.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a common thread there, which is your desire to connect with people. You're so fantastic at that. And I think that understanding that gives you one more way to connect with people. I know we've had a few conversations about that as well, but that makes you an effective teacher, which is you're a world class. I mean, if you boil it down to it, I know you're more than a teacher, but you're world class in your ability to educate people. And I'm sure a lot of that comes from your understanding of the philosophies and beliefs of others.
Oh, well,
Would you
that's
agree with that?
very kind. Thank you, Dave. I certainly think it is true that the more you are able to understand the internal nuances and use the language and be familiar with that of given communities, know what's important, the more you can fit in, the more you can make a connection with people. Because, it's always a little hard. Like if you're trying to get to know people and they're like, whoa, that person is really an outsider. They don't know a thing about how we operate. But if you at least have enough knowledge so that you can contextualize things and ask useful questions and not make a jerk of yourself.
Let's accelerate the timeline a little bit. You graduated and you were originally, it sounded like you were thinking of advocacy for nonprofits. Is that where you started, or did you end up somewhere else?
I actually never. Well, it's not true. I did for a couple of years have a nonprofit job. I was the executive director of a bicycle advocacy organization in Massachusetts. So that was one chapter.
Get out and start riding your bike, everybody.
That's right.
Okay.
I gave you the pitch, Dave. It's it's the bicycle advocacy is the one solution that simultaneously improves the environment, transportation, and public health. Whoa. You want
nice.
Like a threefer right there, solve all the world's problems. The bicycle will do it. So,
you got that pitch down from
that's
working
right.
with them.
That's right. But no, before that, I had done a lot of volunteer work. But broadly speaking, I did not enter into a activist career, even though I was really interested in a lot of social change issues. But my original thought was, after I finished my master's degree, was that I would get a doctorate and go into academia. So I got my master's in theological studies and applied to 3 different doctoral programs in English literature, but I got turned down by all of them. So I had to suddenly really fast do a pivot because I was not anticipating being turned down. So I ultimately was able, after a lot of scrapping and scraping and doing internships and stuff, I finally got my first paid job as a political journalist at an alternative news weekly.
So writing. And maybe is this where the idea started to generate, or did you already think eventually I'm going to write a book? Because now you've written several very successful books. Is that where your interest in writing first began, or was there something before that?
I loved books even as a kid and wanted to write books. Again, if we're going back to the nerdy things that I did as a young child, I cajoled my mother into buying me. There used to be, maybe there still is, although I don't know who would buy it now in this format, but there was a big thick book that they used to sell at the local bookstore, like the Walden Books or whatever, and it was called the Writer's Market. And every year, yeah, it was this big 800 page
publishers
sucker.
and agents and that sort of thing.
That's right. It was like everywhere, the huge compendium of like where you can publish your work in all different styles and all different genres. And I would make her buy it for me. And it was expensive at the time. It was like $25 or $30 when, most books did not cost that. For multiple years, for at least 3 years, I had copies when I was a kid of the Writer's Market. And I would just like spend my summer vacations trying to like send out like poems and short stories and whatever and try to get published.
Oh my goodness. Of course I never beautiful. Did. I love it. I love it. So that was already there, part of it. Do you have any of those poems left over?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do. Actually, they're terrible.
Hey, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
So in 2006, I have here that's when you founded Clark Strategic Communications. What was that? What is that?
Yeah. So that was when I became self-employed. I mean, Clark Strategic Communications is really just, you have to have a name for your business entity. So that's what I picked. But
it sounds very prestigious, and that's a great way to go.
Yes, very august. But I knew really from the beginning that I was never interested as a business model in having a company that I would grow and try to sell or something like that. It just was not what I wanted. It felt too confining. I wanted to be self-employed, and I wanted to have a huge amount of autonomy in doing that. I have managed over the years to keep my business very lean. I've never had a full-time employee. I use 1099 subcontractors and things like that. But it has been great because it has meant that there's quite a bit of autonomy, and it means that you're able to keep your margins very good, your profit margins.
How did you get your first client? I think when someone listens to this and they hang the shingle up, they have their business, they're self-employed, that is the first most difficult thing to overcome. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about who your first client was and how you got them.
I honestly don't even quite remember who my very first client was, but
one of the first.
Yeah, in terms of one of the first, basically, I mean, I started my company when I was not that old. I was 27, so I did not have a base of professional experience.
Yeah. I started when I was 23.
Oh, wow. Nice. Yeah. I was always like really jealous of the people who started it when they were like 50 and they like knew 100 CEOs. I'm like, oh man, that's pretty sweet. Because I clearly did not know any CEOs. But I did what I would advise most people to do, which is that I had worked with some people, I knew some people. And the people who are willing to give you a chance are the people who already know you in some capacity and know that you are competent. So my first major clients that I worked with repeatedly, one was called Stand for Children, which was a education nonprofit. And the reason I ended up working with them is that 4 years prior to starting my business in 2002, I worked on a political campaign. And one of the people who I worked with, who was the volunteer coordinator on that campaign, went on to get hired as the executive director of Stand for Children. And so when I started my business, I sent out a message to everybody I knew, and I'm like, hey, I'm starting this business. And so she, reached out and was like, oh, maybe you can help us. And so it was not that hard, thankfully, to land some clients, because I had people that I had built up a strong enough relationship with that they knew that I didn't necessarily have a lot of experience doing literally this thing, but they knew that I was generally competent and could probably be helpful to them.
What was your biggest obstacle during those years? What were you having to overcome in order to get those thousands of small clients?
I'll answer the question in two different ways. One thing that your question sort of implies it, and it is true. One of the things that was a struggle was that almost all my work was with nonprofit organizations, or, in the case of the National Park Service, it was a government agency that just really did not have large budgets. And so I realized pretty early on, I mean, for a few years, it was great because I'm just like, okay, building the business, filling my roster. But eventually I realized, like, oh, my income is going to be really severely capped if these are the only people that I work with. Like,
Okay.
it's not like, oh, they could pay you so much more and they're not. Like, actually, they're like a nonprofit. Like, they don't have a lot of money. So that was a challenge, was that I realized that I would have to shift the type of clients that I was working with. I would have to make friends with more corporate clients. And I didn't know who those people were. I didn't have those connections. And so I really had to be very, very strategic in building up my reputation and connections in a totally new market.
Okay. So, and that you answered one question that I had, which is, where did the transition come from nonprofit to for-profit? Because, I mean, I know you do work with nonprofits now, but that is not your primary customer now, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I had to really consciously cultivate that over a period of years, for sure.
Was that hard to let go of? I mean, it seemed like everything you were doing prior to that was about nonprofits and social advocacy. And then now you're working with for-profit companies. Did that hurt at all? Was that painful, or were you completely okay with that?
No, I didn't have any problems whatsoever with that. I also, for
Okay.
several years, kind of had a transitional period, I guess, where I continued to work on political campaigns, doing consulting, doing outside consulting. And I eventually stopped because I came to realize that the political campaigns were both the least remunerative thing I was doing, also the most stressful.
So your first book came out in 2013, and you've had several books since then, including The Long Game, which just came out and did quite well, Wall Street Journal bestseller.
Well, mostly
Right?
because I featured Dave Crenshaw in it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but you featured a lot of friends that you have who have done their own unique things to craft a successful life. Talk to me about the role that these books have played in your success.
Well, I'm a big fan of writing books in general. I mean, it doesn't literally have to be a book. Some people, if they are not excited about writing or not comfortable, there's a million other modalities, whether it's audio or video or whatever. But I do believe that it's really important to be sharing your ideas publicly, because that's how you sharpen your ideas, and that's how you get known for your ideas. A point that I make in a lot of my work is that if you want to be recognized more widely, if you want to get to the situation that I think, frankly, most entrepreneurs or most business professionals want to get to, which is, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if people came to me instead of me having to constantly be like, hey, want to hire me? That's what we want, right? Is to be known for our reputation and sought out for it. Well, guess what? You really can't be. You almost structurally can't be if people don't know what your ideas are. You have to give them something transmissible so that they can see for themselves that you're smart, that you make sense, that you can help them. Otherwise, all they'll get is like somebody saying, well, Dave's a really nice guy, but like that's not enough of a reason to hire Dave. They need to see Dave's LinkedIn course.
Yeah, well, and if you can hand someone a book
Yeah.
and say, here it is. I also find too, I love that, give them something transmissible. I also think that process of putting it together in a book helps you solidify what you believe in as a teacher. Is that what you've experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It requires a sort of distillation that's really important to get clear on it.
So you're also, it has you listed as a professor at Duke. Is that correct? So how
Yeah.
much of your time is devoted to that still? Because I know you're doing so many different things.
Yeah, it's a piece that is important to me. I've been teaching at Duke for nearly a decade now. Next year it'll be a decade. But it is, in terms of my overall portfolio, a relatively small amount of time. I teach a couple of times a year an executive education program at Fuqua, which is Duke's business school. It's something that I definitely enjoy doing.
And you used a great word there that I want to highlight, which is portfolio. You have a lot of things in your portfolio. You've got the books, you have being a university professor, we mentioned the accolades that you've received from Marshall Goldsmith and being one of the top thinkers in the world. You also have LinkedIn Learning, where you have lots of different courses. And I want to talk about that in just a second. But I'd like to get your perspective on the value of a diverse portfolio of work. Has that been on purpose, or has that been accidental to create that?
It has largely been on purpose, in the sense that
Okay.
it took me quite a while to operationalize this, but I had a real revelation early in my career in 2001 when I was working as a journalist, and it was, my first paid full-time job, and I had been doing it for just about a year, and I ended up getting laid off very unexpectedly on September 10th, 2001. And planning to
Oh my
start my
goodness.
job search the next day, which clearly didn't happen. And
Yeah.
just recognizing how fragile the situation can be if you only have one income source. I mean, they gave me less than a week's severance. They gave me 4 days of severance because I had already worked Monday. So they paid me, generous guys. They paid me through the end of the week. And then, in the midst of this national economic crisis, national homeland security crisis, it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess you got to figure out how to support yourself now. I mean, it was just so alarming. And I realized, oh my gosh, I would like to try to take the steps so that I never have to be in that situation again. That because things change, clients can get rid of you either suddenly or over time. A gig that you thought was locked up might change or be canceled. And you just can't be overly reliant on any one thing. That's a real structural vulnerability. And so it's really important to have that portfolio so that if one thing goes down, you don't have to have the structure implode.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me too that someone who has courses on thinking strategically and you've built a whole career out of strategy, that you would make diversification a part of your strategy because of that protection.
Yeah,
And
I
we've
know
had
you're a little bit
conversations
more of
about
a
that.
go deep guy rather than a go wide guy, though.
And you know what? And that's part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast, because I truly believe that there are infinite pathways to success. And I like the fact that in that case, at least, there are a lot of similarities. We have a slightly different philosophy, and it's worked for me and it's worked for you. And so someone listening to this can say, maybe I want to be more diverse like Dorie Clark and have these different ways to protect my strategic investment. Or maybe I want to be a little more like Dave, where you just really ride what's hot as long as you can, and you just set money aside and prepare for the future while you're doing that. Both get you the same result, just different levels of what you're comfortable with.
Totally. Yeah.
I didn't ask this, but I have to ask this before we go. Broadway musical. You have written a Broadway musical. Is that correct?
I have written a musical that I would like to one day go to Broadway, just to be clear.
Oh, okay. You've written a musical for Broadway.
That's right. That's right. Have not made it there yet, but I am aiming. My goal that I created actually back in 2016 is I had a 10-year goal for myself that I wanted to write a musical that would make it to Broadway by the 2026 season. So I am continuing to march forward and attempting to make progress on that. I was starting literally from a standing start. I had never written a musical, did not know how to write musicals. And over the past 6 years, I feel like there's been a lot of progress. I was accepted into and completed a pretty prestigious musical theater training program. I have now written a complete musical. I'm actually working on 2 others as well. The musical, it's called Absolute Zero, had a staged reading in Dallas earlier this year. Just last week, we meaning my composer, collaborator, and myself, won second place with the musical in a competition run by NMI, which is a New Musicals Incorporated, which is a prestigious outfit out of Los Angeles that sources new musicals. So we're working on it, trying to get there.
I love it. How important is that to you to have something very different than your day-to-day job? Do you feel like that's an essential part of your success? I'm trying not to lead you with the question, but how does that fit into your strategy for your life?
It fits in actually because this is part of a portfolio career sort of strategy, right? I think of this, and this is a concept that I write about in The Long Game. I think of this as being part of my 20% time where I'm doing sort of experimental activities. Writing musicals, has it made me money? The answer is yes. I believe the specific amount is $200 over the past 6 years. so I have made money, but this is not anything I'm going to retire on or even pay my rent or, my internet bill with, to be very clear. That being said, for most things in life, if you are trying to build a skill set, there's a very long incubation period where something does not make you any money at all. But eventually, when you get good, when you get proficient, there's sort of a tipping point where if it actually did go to Broadway, I could make a lot of money from it. This could be very lucrative. I mean, not that money per se is why I'm doing it, but just as one measure. So this really is a process. And it's a process that if I tried to do it in a year, I mean, obviously it would never work, right? I mean, this is a very long-term endeavor of learning to do something, doing it, building connections, getting sufficient credentials to be able to do this. So I think it's important for me to hedge, because the work that I do over the years, it may change. I may get bored or feel like I need a new challenge or whatever. Like, you've got to prepare for all kinds of eventualities. And so giving yourself a decade-long goal with plenty of time to operationalize it and execute it, I think is quite important. And this is my version of that.
Yeah. I loved your word experimental time, that 20%. I use a similar concept, which is gambling. There's a certain amount of your time that you can devote to gambling on something speculative. I'm not talking about going to Vegas and putting money. I'm talking about saying, you know what, I'm going to spend a little bit of my time on a musical. The question is, how much can I afford to risk on that? How much time can I afford to risk? How much money can I afford to risk? I wrote a sci-fi book for kids, and that was a risk of time and money. And I think it's good to have those sort of things where there's just an opportunity for something unexpected to occur.
Absolutely.
Before I wrap this up, I need to highlight how amazing you are at connecting with people. And that's a big part of your overall success. I've experienced it personally in a lot of little ways in which you, Dorie, have reached out and have done just lovely things. Like, for instance, when my family went to New York and we were staying there at an Airbnb in Queens for a month, and I reached out to you and said, hey, we're in town, can we connect? And you're like, I have this tickets to a Broadway show. Do you want to come with me? And we hadn't even known each other then. And then you said, hey, we're having a gathering of friends. Would you like to come join us for dinner? And you have these gatherings all the time. And it's gone way beyond that too. Like, you know that I'm a fan of non-alcoholic cocktails, right? I don't drink, but I love lots of exotic mocktails. And you sent me an amazing bottle of non-alcoholic spirits. And every once in a while, you'll send me, hey, here are places in New York where you can get a drink. You're so thoughtful and so aware of other people's needs. And I know that there are two reasons for that, because I've gotten to know you quite well. And one is you just genuinely care about people. And two, you also understand that there's long-term value in doing that sort of thing. Can you share just a little bit about maybe your philosophy or your process of building connections with other people?
Yeah, well, thank you, Dave. It's very kind of you, and I appreciate it. I would say when it comes to building connections and things like that, I think where a lot of this comes from in many ways is I think of myself as an introvert, and there's a lot of situations where people do not put sufficient time or care into the conditions under which people can form relationships. And it's not that easy to form relationships, especially as an adult. In school, in college, you're sort of just thrown in with a bunch of people your age that you inherently have huge amounts in common with. You're taking the same classes, you're doing the same thing. So it's relatively easy to make friends there. But as an adult, it's harder. The conditions are harder. They're less frequent. And yet so many of the opportunities that we have are things that are just not conducive at all. It's like, it's a party, but it's too loud to actually hear anyone talk anyway. Or,
Sure.
it's a gathering and you don't know anyone, but nobody has name tags. And so you don't know who's there. They tell you their name, but you can't hear it anyway.
And
And
you're uncomfortable to reach out to somebody new, especially if you're an introvert.
absolutely. And there's probably people there that would be worthwhile for you to meet, but you don't know who they are because there's no guide posts on it. And so it feels like this totally hit or miss thing that's actually incredibly uncomfortable. And so I just hate situations like that. And over time, I've actually gotten almost like really angry about it when people are so careless with those opportunities, because they have the opportunity to create something so much better and so much nicer. I mean, it's a real mitzvah to be able to help people craft relationships with other people. Like, it makes me so happy when I can help people become friends. And it just doesn't take a lot. It takes, a little bit of planning, a little bit of care. I had my birthday yesterday, and I had a birthday dinner. And first of all, instead of a birthday party, which I've gone to many birthday parties, and it's like, whatever, 50 people. And it's just like, well, it's nice for you as the host because you know everybody. But, the other people, they don't know everybody. It's like, it can be very nerve wracking and uncomfortable. And I think maybe if somebody's an extrovert, or maybe, I don't know, if they have better skills than I do, they are not daunted by a situation like that. But I am. I just don't like it one bit. So I've learned to try to avoid those scenarios over time. So my version of a birthday gathering, it's half a dozen people. It's a dinner. In advance of it, we sent out an email with bios of the attendees, links to their LinkedIn profile. So everybody would know who was there. They could think in advance about what they wanted to talk about with people. And then at the start of the dinner, we had everyone go around and do introductions. So that it was a reminder of who was who. And we had people give a little bit of background about who they were and what they were up to and whatever. So that for the rest of the night, you could grease the wheels with conversational possibilities that were actually salient and relevant, and gave people a fighting chance to make a real friend, as compared to just sipping your drink and standing in the corner. So I really feel like, just with a little bit of extra thought and care, people can create positive conditions for other folks. And I wish more people would do that, because it's just not that hard.
Yeah, and I've attended some of those dinners, and you always encourage everyone to answer a thought-provoking question, like, what's a big win for you in the last 3 months, that sort of thing. But you're right, you're establishing the rules of the game that make it possible for people to connect. I really appreciate that about you, and I hope everyone listening just grabbed on to what you taught, because you are skilled, you are intelligent, you are gifted at what you do, but those connections are what really allow you to use those gifts and help people. All right, we could do this for hours. We could all learn from you. And thankfully, if only there were a place people could go, like LinkedIn Learning, where they could learn from you. What I always do at the end of these interviews, Dorie, though, is I like to pause and highlight a few actions that someone listening could take. So my kids could take it, or anyone listening could say, what's one thing I'm going to do? Because I think if you take one thing out of what Dorie said and you make it a part of your life, you've now got a little bit of Dorie Clark with you for the rest of your life. So I'm going to highlight 3 things, Dorie, that I saw are possible actions. And then I'd love for you to add 1 or 2 to that after I've done this.
Love it. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. So the first one, and we've seen this throughout Dorie's life, especially with the degrees that she got, is expose yourself to new ideas, challenging ideas, maybe even ideas that you don't believe in or agree with, but just seek it out. Go get a book on philosophy, go get a book on religion, go get anything that is something you don't understand yet, and learn about it. And just the act of exposing yourself to that new challenging idea will stir possibilities in your life. The second thing is, just if you could take a part of Dorie's desire to connect with people from the beginning, trying to find out the way that people found meaning in their life and understanding others. And then we hear just recently the effort into connecting with others. Do something to understand someone that you don't know. If there's somebody that you work with or that you're associated with and you don't know how to connect with them, try to figure out who they are and what they believe in, and maybe you can find a way to connect with them. And then I want to highlight your phrase, give people something transmissible in terms of your ideas. Share your ideas publicly, and you don't have to write a book. Just maybe next week, make a social media post about something that you're working on or thinking about, and take the time to maybe write a paragraph or two, or even put together a 1-minute video and share it with people. The act of sharing it publicly will help you solidify your ideas, and it will help you become better known for what it is that you care about. Okay, so those are 3 out of a million I could have gotten. Dorie, what's 1 or 2 suggested actions we would give to someone listening?
All right. Thank you, Dave. Well, I would say, building on the great points that you identified, one that I would add is, don't be afraid to be a host. I think that a very large percentage of people feel like hosting is not something they can do, or it's something that they've never thought about doing. And so they end up waiting for other people's invitations, and they just feel like connecting people or whatever is out of their reach. But the truth is, most people are just crying out to be invited. And it becomes a really wonderful thing you can do for people. Invite someone for the first time and make that first move, and they won't forget it. They'll be generally extremely happy, and you're doing a really good deed. And I wish that more people recognize that was well within their power.
Oh man, I love that concept. And I've never heard it put that way. Be a host. Have you written anything about that? Is that a chapter in any of your books?
Not necessarily. No.
Oh man,
So maybe I should.
That would make a great post. I think that would be a wonderful thing to share with people. And you practice what you preach. You're going to be a host to a gathering there in Miami coming up soon that I'm really excited about. So you absolutely live that principle. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. I feel like you've given us so much wisdom and so many pearls and nuggets that people can apply in their lives. Thank you for your generosity in doing that.
Thank you, Dave. I so appreciate the chance to talk with you. If folks want to check out my stuff, you can go to dorieclark.com/thelonggame. You can get a free strategic thinking self-assessment and, tap into some of the stuff that I'm doing. And it's really a treat to get to spend time with you virtually, Dave.
Yeah, and you beat me to it. A lot of my listeners also are on LinkedIn Learning. If you haven't yet, you absolutely need to take Dorie Clark's courses there. They are world-class. Thank you, Dorie, for being on. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember, it's not just about the knowledge that you received. It's about the action that you take. So please think of one thing that you're going to do and do it. And then you'll take Dorie Clark with you for the rest of your life.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bidez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. Show consulting by Andrew Marino. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.